Hello and welcome to the next module for your Words Their Way training. This is the last module for Chapter 2 out of the PD book, which is this blue, yellow, and white book on the left-hand side of the slide. So we will discuss grouping students for instruction in this module as well as monitoring growth through this program. So for grouping students for instruction, I am taking information found on page 35 of the PD book, so definitely look over that. And then the two documents that I'm about to share are on the PD toolkit for Pearson. So after you have given the elementary spelling inventory, also known as the QSI, after you have filled out the feature guide that we discussed in the previous video, you then will use one of these two charts to put your students into groups. I am going to talk about the second option more because I think that's the easier option. However, I did want to give an overview of the classroom composite chart. So if you wanted to take a little more time on this step, you could go through using each student's feature guide that we discussed in the last chapter, the last video, sorry. You can fill out how many points they got for each one of these features for every single student. And then you could see an overall idea of what your students in your class are struggling with, what specific students are struggling with. And then that could tell you whether they go into within word pattern in the early, middle, or late, etc. Again, this is more involved and is an option for you if you so choose to go that direction. However, I would suggest at first using this one, the spelling by stage classroom organization chart. So here's one that's already filled out for you, and they actually give you three examples, one from first grade at the top, third grade in the middle, and sixth grade at the end, or at the bottom. So I'm going to show you the third grade example. So you basically just take your kids and you put them in the correct or underneath the category that you assigned them using that feature guide that we discussed in the last video. And then you group students that are in either the same exact early, middle, or late stage or close to it. The key thing to keep in mind here, guys, is that having more than 3 groups in your class, assuming that you're keeping your own kids, and that is what we are recommending because you cut down on transition time, which we don't have a lot of additional time in our schedule. And then also because you can then make the transfer or the application to the reading and writing because you know your kids in your class and their spelling stage. So we are recommending that you keep your own kids for this. So for that, you would not have more than 3 or 4 groups. 4 is doable, harder than 3 groups in your class, but I would suggest, and if it were me, I would shoot for having 3 Words Their Way groups with your homeroom class. So that's what they did here. They split it up into 3 different groups. The first group was pretty obvious. They put all of the early within word pattern kids, Josh and Dustin in there. And then the middle kids, Dominic, Ian, Emily, and Brennan together. Then the upper group, the syllables and affixes group, that was pretty self-explanatory as well. The challenge for this particular teacher was that they had a lot in the late within word pattern, and that was really too many. So you see the arrows where they said, okay, Eric and Cliff is going to go with this group. Melanie and Paula is going to go with this group. How did they decide that? Again, they considered that students reading and writing because the QSI or the elementary spelling inventory is not the end all be all, is one piece of information. They use their knowledge of the students reading, the knowledge of the students writing, and just what they knew about the students. And sometimes it's a mix of personalities too that might make the determining factor. So that's basically how you decide what stage that they are in. Do not overthink what stage to put them in. Again, put them in a stage, Go lower versus going higher if you have that opportunity, because you could always move them more quickly to the next sort if that is needed. And it's not going to hurt them to go back from late to middle or middle to early. It's still going to be great information for them to have and for them to apply. Okay, so then after that, you have your groups. You are ready to start instruction in your classroom. So one thing that we had a lot of questions on when we did the pilot was, how do I know whether my students are learning these words or not? And I don't think that we did a very good job of informing teachers of the opportunities that are out there to assess students um, as they go through the program. We had the benchmark, and that was helpful, but we only gave that twice during the pilot. So we needed some other checks on their learning. So that's what I'm going to go through now. So one possibility, and this is recommended, that you do weekly spelling tests. It does look similar to the traditional spelling test, but we use it in a different way. So you're going to check on their orthographic feature that they studied in the sort for that week. We haven't gone into this a lot yet, but students will be sorting words into categories based on a certain pattern within the spelling of the word. So when it says check on orthographic feature, that simply means we're checking on the pattern of spelling that the student studied that week when they sorted words. This is good because students know they're accountable for that learning. If you find students are struggling on on the weekly assessments, they may not be ready to study that feature, and you might need to move them back into an earlier sort. Keep these spelling tests simple. I would certainly be okay with, and I would probably, if it were myself, spend one day a week just giving the spelling test, maybe a Friday test. Again, don't think that that means we're going back to the traditional spelling approach, because how we use the information is much different than we do in traditional spelling. And it's very differentiated too. Um, so what do you use for these weekly spelling tests? Well, two different things. One, use a few words from the week's sort. So whatever words that those students had in their sorts, and you'll see the sorts in a different video. Just pull five, 6 or 7 words from that sort. Okay. And then you will also want to include some challenge words, if you want to call them that, but it's words that they have not specifically worked with that week, but still have the pattern. So where do you find those words at? Look in Appendix D of the PD book, the blue, yellow, and white book, or Appendix E of that book. They also have additional application words or new words within the spelling stage that you're teaching from that book. So let's say you're teaching from syllables and affixes. At the end of each lesson in this book, they have some transfer words, some new words that you could use for that weekly spelling test. I wouldn't test probably more than 10-ish words for this. It's just a quick check to see how they did that week, to see if they need to continue that sort, move on to another sort, or whatever the case may be. Second option for assessing student knowledge in Words Their Way is a unit test. Okay, so far we've discussed the benchmark that everybody has to give 3 times a year. We discussed the weekly spelling test that is recommended, and then we have the unit test. The unit tests are given about it varies, but every 9, 10, or 11 lessons to check for mastery after several weeks. You can use this as a pre and as a post if you would like to. So before you start the unit, give the assessment, and then at the end. These tests are in the spelling stage book you're teaching from. So if you have a group using within word patterns, that's their stage, then each lesson or I shouldn't say lesson, it's not in each lesson, every 9 or 10 lessons, they have one of these unit tests for you to use. And the words are right there for you. Everything's right there for giving that assessment. Additional words, however, can be found in the, oops, I need a space right there. Sorry about that, in the PD toolkit found online. And then this one, we already discussed this, guys. This is a benchmark, the QSI, also known as the Elementary Spelling Inventory. That's what is required by everybody. Make sure you keep these benchmarks so we can see the yearly progress. So to make this simple, I did make up a document, which I will have in a couple of different spots for you. I'll put it in our Google folder and then also link it on my website. But so you don't have to go back and watch this video and hear my voice again. You could just refer to this document. Everything I just talked about, the QSI, the weekly spelling test, the unit test, and then also assessing through writing and anecdotal notes. These are all different ways that you can assess whether students are learning the patterns that they're studying or not. We do not recommend just giving the qualitative spelling inventory and never checking in on their spelling again. The weekly spelling tests are so important, as are the unit tests, so we know that the students are progressing, as is the writing and the anecdotal notes. Within this document, I give you an overview of what the assessment is, whether it's required or recommended from a district standpoint, and then any needed information or links to the documents that you need are in this as well. Okay, so progress monitoring. Having students track their own progress, as you know, is super powerful. So within your spelling stage book, not the PD book, but within the spelling stage book, they have progress monitoring forms that you could use. And here's an example for syllables and affixes. So you'll have a copy of each one of these for each student. They can record their weekly test, as you see right here. So for lesson 2, that was the pattern they were studying, adding ing and then double. They can record their score there. Test 5 or sort 5, they can record their score there. It's not after every sort, but after every few sorts, they can record that weekly spelling test. And then also their unit test as well. That's the one that's every 9 or so lessons. They can record the date and their score on that as well so that they can see their progress. This would be an excellent thing to show parents of how you're differentiating for their child and then how their student is progressing. The PD toolkit also has spell checks and monitoring growth sheets. So that's that online website, but use those as a secondary option as they are not aligned to these new spelling stage books. We're using the 2018, the most recent publication, and they have not updated the PD toolkit yet. So the words that you find for the spell checks in the PD toolkit may not match the lesson that you're on within your book. So just be leery of that. Okay, this is just FYI for you too. I'll put this in our Google folder. This shows you approximately what is considered grade level as far as stage development for each one of the grades. And it tells you typical spelling stage ranges within the grade and then at the end of the year what they should be shooting for. Okay, what pages do I tab in chapter 2? So grab your Post-it notes, whatever you're using. I would tab page 31, which is that example of a feature guide for QSI. Page 36, example of the classroom composite chart, which is not recommended, but you could, well, it's recommended, but it's your choice whether you use the composite chart or not. Page 38, which is an example of the spelling by stage classroom organization chart. We do recommend and suggest that you use that to group your kids. Page 43, spelling stage by expectations and grade level. Okay, so that concludes our learning about words their way from chapter 2, again, which was focused on assessment. Again, guys, definitely go back and read over information in that PD book. You do not have to read it page for page, front to back, but obviously that would be helpful if you did. But definitely go to those areas that you feel like you have a question on. go back to that section because the answer is likely there. All right, thanks guys.